Be Your Future Self Now by Dr. Benjamin Hardy. Be Your Future Self Now addresses a problem that quietly limits personal growth, leadership development, and long-term success: the tendency to treat the future self as a distant abstraction rather than a present influence. Dr. Benjamin Hardy argues that many people operate reactively, shaped primarily by current circumstances, habits, and short-term pressures. As a result, they make decisions based on convenience rather than alignment with the person they ultimately want to become. The book's central premise is that transformation does not begin with external achievement or gradual self-improvement alone. It begins with identity. Hardy proposes that individuals who create meaningful change do so by developing a clear relationship with their future self and allowing that envisioned identity to shape present behavior. Rather than waiting to become someone different someday, the book challenges readers to begin acting in alignment with that future version immediately. For entrepreneurs and leaders, this concept has significant implications. Organizations often grow only to the extent that the leader's identity grows. If leadership decisions are driven by outdated self-perceptions, fear-based thinking, or short-term emotional reactions, growth eventually plateaus. Hardy positions the future self not as fantasy, but as a strategic tool for decision-making, focus, and long-term alignment. The core framework: identity shapes behavior. At the center of Hardy's argument is the idea that behavior follows identity. People do not consistently act against their self-concept for long periods of time. If someone views themselves as disorganized, reactive, or limited, their actions eventually reinforce that identity, even if they intellectually desire something greater. Hardy argues that most people attempt change from the outside in. They focus on goals, tactics, or productivity systems while leaving their underlying identity untouched. This creates inconsistency because behavior and self-perception remain misaligned. The implication is that lasting transformation requires redefining who someone believes they are becoming. Once identity changes, behavior becomes more coherent and sustainable. Decisions begin to align naturally with long-term objectives rather than immediate impulses. When this principle is ignored, individuals remain trapped in cycles of temporary motivation followed by regression. They may achieve short bursts of progress, but without identity-level change, old behaviors eventually return. The future self as a present influence. Hardy introduces the concept of future self-connectedness, which refers to the strength of the relationship between the current self and the future self. Many people make poor long-term decisions because they experience their future self as psychologically distant. They prioritize short-term comfort because the future consequences feel disconnected from the present moment. The book reframes the future self as an active influence rather than a passive outcome. The clearer and more emotionally real the future self becomes, the more current decisions begin to shift. This matters because clarity about the future changes behavior in the present. Individuals who feel connected to their future self are more likely to invest in long-term growth, delay immediate gratification, and make decisions aligned with larger objectives. The contrast is significant. When the future self remains vague, daily actions become reactive and fragmented. When the future self becomes vivid and specific, actions gain coherence and direction. Eliminating the past as the primary reference point. A major idea is that many individuals unconsciously define themselves by their past rather than by their future. Past experiences, failures, labels, and emotional narratives become identity anchors. Hardy argues that this creates a form of psychological stagnation where the past continually dictates the boundaries of possibility. The book challenges the assumption that identity must remain tied to previous outcomes. Instead, Hardy proposes that the future should become the dominant reference point. The question shifts from, "Who have I been?" to, "Who am I becoming?" The implication is transformative. When the future becomes more influential than the past, individuals gain greater freedom to evolve. They stop treating previous limitations as permanent definitions. When this concept is misunderstood, people often confuse consistency with loyalty to old versions of themselves. They continue repeating behaviors that no longer align with their desired future because those behaviors feel familiar. Environment shapes identity and behavior. Hardy also emphasizes the role of environment in shaping identity. He He argues that people are deeply influenced by the systems, relationships, routines, and physical spaces surrounding them. Identity is not formed solely through internal willpower, it is reinforced through external conditions. Organizational culture functions as an environmental force that shapes employee behavior and decision-making. Leaders who intentionally design environments aligned with future objectives create momentum toward growth. Leaders who neglect environmental design often reinforce outdated behaviors unintentionally. The contrast becomes clear in business settings. Companies attempting innovation while maintaining rigid systems experience resistance and inconsistency. Organizations that align environment with future identity create stronger adaptability and execution. The power of selective ignorance. One of Hardy's more strategic concepts is selective ignorance, the idea that meaningful progress requires intentionally filtering distractions, opportunities, and inputs that do not align with the future self. The modern environment rewards responsiveness and constant engagement. However, Hardy argues that overexposure to competing priorities fragments identity and weakens focus. High performers often succeed not because they do more, but because they eliminate more. The implication is that clarity requires exclusion. Commitment to a future identity demands saying no to activities, relationships, and opportunities that dilute alignment. When selective ignorance is ignored, individuals become reactive to external demands rather than proactive about internal priorities. Energy disperses across too many directions, limiting meaningful progress. Applications to business. The concepts in Be Your Future Self now apply directly to leadership and business strategy. Leaders shape organizations not only through decisions, but through identity. The standards leaders tolerate, the risks they avoid, and the vision they pursue are all reflections of how they see themselves. Entrepreneurs operating from outdated self-concepts often limit organizational growth unconsciously. They maintain operational habits appropriate for earlier stages of business, even when the company requires a different level of leadership. The book's emphasis on future identity encourages leaders to make decisions based on long-term alignment rather than short-term comfort. This affects hiring, delegation, strategic planning, and innovation. At the organizational level, the Future Self framework also influences culture. Teams perform more effectively when they understand not only current objectives, but the future identity of the organization itself. Clear vision creates alignment and improves decision-making throughout the system. Companies that fail to evolve their identity often become trapped by previous success models. Companies that continually redefine themselves around future possibilities remain adaptable and competitive. Actionable takeaways. The central takeaway from Be Your Future Self now is that meaningful change begins with identity rather than external achievement. The future self must become concrete enough to influence present decisions consistently. Growth accelerates when individuals stop defining themselves primarily by past experiences and instead orient themselves toward future alignment. Leadership development requires more than acquiring new tactics. It requires redefining the standards, behaviors, and decisions associated with the future version of oneself. Environments, routines, and relationships must also align with that identity to reinforce consistent behavior. The book also highlights the importance of intentional focus. Progress requires the discipline to ignore distractions that weaken alignment with long-term objectives. Clarity is strengthened through elimination as much as through addition. Conclusion: Dr. Benjamin Hardy's Be Your Future Self now reframes personal development as a process of identity expansion rather than incremental self-improvement and argues that individuals grow fastest when the future becomes more influential than the past. For entrepreneurs, leaders, and ambitious professionals, this shift changes how decisions are made. The future self becomes a filter for behavior, priorities, and relationships. Instead of reacting to circumstances, individuals begin acting from alignment with who they intend to become. The central insight is both practical and strategic. Transformation occurs when the future self stops being distant and starts shaping the present moment. If this breakdown provided value, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and enable notifications for more leadership and personal development insights designed for real-world application. Hardy, Benjamin. Be Your Future Self Now: The Science of Intentional Transformation. Hay House Business, 2022.